You might know this question here. It was from our national mock exam. This is obviously on Hot Topic 9, micronutrients. And what I want to do is we're going to explain the importance for a rugby player, but we want to draw out just one of these minerals. I'm going to sort of take you on the story of one particular nutrient so you can see some of the depth that you might be required to show. So let's just take the minerals aspect of this. Obviously, fats for energy. That energy can be used for various aspects of rugby. Water for hydration to prevent dehydration at the end of the match, etc. But let's just focus on minerals. What does it do? It is, or what do? They are essential. They are essential for, and of course the word health or healthiness comes in here, for a healthy body. Okay, so we need them for health. How's that going to help a rugby player? Well, we could give the example that calcium, there's our example here, increases bone density, which of course we can now apply to the rugby player, increases bone density, which reduces the chances of a fracture, which reduces, let's say during a tackle, which reduces the chances of a fracture, and let's just say when tackling, just for ease here, of a fracture, a broken bone, of course, when tackling. Okay, so what we've done there is we have said, what is the role of our mineral? It's essential for a healthy body, and because calcium increases bone density, it's an aspect of health. This can reduce the chance of something like an injury occurring. So we like that answer because we're expressing it. But what if that went further? What if we got a question like this and you had to differentiate that answer about vitamins from minerals? So, for example, and my answer might not be exactly the same, but here, have a look at this one. Vitamins is a slightly different answer. We've got here essential for the body to function. Notice that in essence here, folks, this is the function of a vitamin, okay? And that's going to get us a mark. But notice that we've got to provide the same structure. And by the way, you really might need your pause button here, mightn't you, if you want to note down the whole answer. But vitamin C helps healing and to fight infection. This is important in rugby due to the physical nature of the game. Players need to recover quickly and fight off infections so they can return to training. So do you see here, that part of that answer would give us, it's a big part actually, but that would give us our second here. But the point we're trying to make, folks, is that you could be answering that as well as minerals. And how can you differentiate the answer? Because this answer feels pretty close to that one, doesn't it? Okay, we're not talking about vitamin C, we're talking about our bone density and calcium again. But notice here, essential for a healthy body. That's the answer we had above. For our 1 mark. And here's roughly what I wrote before. For example, calcium increases bone density. So do you see how that depth is required in much more detail when we look to sort of answer on both vitamins and minerals? Well, what if we took that, by the way, that would be a max, of course, but what if we took that story further? What if you were to get a question, and I don't know if it would go to this depth, but what if you were to get a question like that? Explain the importance of the following for a rugby player: iron, calcium and zinc, all minerals, and all we have to apply specifically. Are you able to do that? Well, what would someone do? Let's have a little look. And by the way, again, you might want to pause here, take your time with this, and you might want to sort of get these answers in and really think about them. So what does iron do? It plays a role in improving oxygen carrying capacity. So there's our function. That would get us our mark. Which prevents fatigue. And there's our explanation. Okay, so we get our 2 from there. See how we take that? We need to know what iron does and the impact it has in rugby. Let's take it further with calcium. What have we got here? And again, pause if you need to. Important to keep bones strong. Okay, we mentioned that before, didn't we? Bone density. There we go. So we've got that again. Prevents fractures. We had that from above. Do you see how that first answer, yes, it's been used again, but we need the equivalent answers elsewhere. What about zinc? Oh, could we answer this question? Would they ask it? I'm not sure they would, but we'll be ready in case they do. It encourages health and cell growth. So we like that. There's our 1. So the rugby player can fight off sickness quickly and not miss training. Fight off sickness quickly, not miss training. We love that answer. Connect those up as sunglasses. Bang. There's our max. Now, obviously, I'm throwing lots of words at you there, but the concept I want to get across to you is how we have been able to start with just the general understanding of minerals applied to rugby, differentiate them from vitamins, and now go into the detail of different minerals. Well, what, folks, if we had different vitamins, the same concept, and we'll take our time with this, and this is where I do want you scribbling after me, and I'm going to do this very much as shorthand. You're going to do it in full, please. Your teacher has full answers for this if you want to borrow it from them. But what is this vitamin B stuff doing for us? Okay, what have we got here? It helps to release carbohydrates, It helps to release carbohydrates for muscles. Okay, so that's good. But carbohydrates, glucose gets into the muscle tissue, so that's fantastic. And what will this do is it will prevent, I'm just going to put here, prevent early fatigue. Now, I would be a bit more technical normally and say prevent early onset of fatigue and things like this, which means the player can still tackle, can still tackle in minute 80. Now, can I stress again, your teacher has the perfect typed answer to this if you want to get it from them. But there's my version of it, sort of from my own head. But you see here, if we were to mark that again, we've got the idea of release carbohydrates from muscles, beautiful. And we've got here, prevent early fatigue, meaning the player can still tackle in minute 80. There's my mark over there for my tick, obviously. Now let me go back to my answer. I want to come back to my black pen. What about vitamin C? What does it do? It fights infection. Wonderful. We like that. And of course, you see the answer we're going to get here. Player. I'm just going to put, you've got your own answer again, teachers. I'm doing this from the top of my head to some degree. Player is well enough to train 3 times per week. Okay. Again, you've got the idea of what the vitamin does and the impact it has on the rugby player in this case. With vitamin D, it aids absorption of calcium. So this vitamin D stuff is really important. And by the way, we get vitamin D from the sun mostly. So in order for you to get calcium to your bones for good density of the bones, you need to be in the sun at times. I'm sure you guys will be fine with that. And obviously it can help us to develop strong, healthy bones. And what does this do? It reduces the chances of fracture. By the way, just on a side note, this stuff's actually really, vitamin D, chances of fracture. This stuff's really important also for preventing things like tendonitis and epicondylitis, things like tennis elbow and this kind of stuff. So sore elbows, sore joints, this sort of thing. Sometimes working people that experience this because they're in the office or they're at home a lot, not getting the sun enough. So that's actually something to look out for. But the model itself, starting from right back up here, we've got minerals, health, an example, calcium, bone density, prevents fractures, and we've taken that through a journey and we can now answer much more coherently across a range of aspects. So folks, a bunch of statements about ethics. Which ones are right and wrong? But let's start with the wrong one first. And by the way, I encourage you to go over these and decide for yourself. But this is wrong, folks. Gamesmanship and deviance are not the same. Gamesmanship, basically, folks, is bending the rules, taking the rules to their fullest advantage. Deviance is deliberately breaking the rules. Okay, so it's not just committing a foul, but it's deliberately, there's an R in there, breaking the rules in order to get the fullest advantage. Well, no, let me rephrase that. It's breaking the rules in order to cheat, whereas bending the rules, taking the fullest advantage, is within the rules. Okay, so one can do that. Now, this statement, an example of sportsmanship is shaking hands after a game. This is a lovely example of sportsmanship, or by the way, we use the term sportsmanship, not sportspersonship. I'm using those words interchangeably, but that's the accepted term as we record this. Here, punishments need to be more lenient in order to deter cheats. Now, I'm going to tell you that this is wrong. Okay, the idea is that probably punishments need to be a little bit harsher to deter cheats. Now, there are different schools of thought on that. Anyone that's doing GCSE history and doing the crime and punishment model will know the saying, hanged for a lamb as well as a sheep, I think it's called, which is basically, if you get really harsh punishments for the low-level things, you might as well just do the high-level things. So I'm not going to go too far into that, but basically we're going to claim that's wrong and that there should be harsher punishments. This one here, sport and performers' reputations can be improved through negative behaviour. Generally, we consider this to be false. We tend to use the word tarnished when behaviour is poor. Okay, there are some exceptions. There are some exceptions that use the media in a way where they can kind of do anything and get away with it. But generally, negative behaviour will cause a tarnished reputation overall. So we can get that into our answers. What about an example of gamesmanship is time wasting? No, this is not true. Time wasting is breaking rules. So breaking rules. So therefore, time wasting, okay, that becomes a form of deviance. Now, if we do what a lot of people call game management, which is, like play for territory in rugby, kick more than you run the ball, if you take low risks, if you keep the ball down the other end, all that's completely legal, game management, and that would be example of gamesmanship, changing your style of play to just be very defensive, for example. Now, the qualities of gamesmanship are gracious in victory and respecting the opposition. The qualities of gamesmanship are being gracious in victory and respecting the opposition. No, this is not true. If we were to say that this was sportsmanship, okay, that would be true, okay, but it says gamesmanship, so this is not true in this particular case. This one here, taking performance-enhancing drugs is an example of deviance. That is an excellent statement for true. It's a brilliant example of breaking the rules. This one here, participation levels can increase if athletes feel the only way that they can win is by taking PEDs. Participation levels can increase if athletes feel the only way they can win is by taking PEDs. Participation levels can increase if athletes feel the only way they can win is by taking PEDs, as parents may not encourage their children to take part in sport due to its reputation. So this one, of course, we can see here is false. This here is false. This sort of participation levels increase because of PEDs. No, they fall because of that. And you can see perhaps why they fall. There's our explanation there. And we've got here, performers are role models and need to set a good example. Their behaviour will not be copied and can increase deviance at grassroots levels. No, this is not true. This bit here, folks, this bit here is true. We'd say, yes, that's correct. But their behaviour will not be copied and increase deviance. No, their behaviour absolutely will be copied. So if we were to get rid of this, then it becomes true, okay? If we could get rid of this and put in the word sportsmanship, that would be true, okay? That would be true. So we've got to be obviously a little bit sort of discretionary with our views there. Now, let's take it on. Let's go to here. What's the difference between gamesmanship and deviance? Well, let's just put our answer in nice and simple from what we've done already. So we've got here the idea of gamesmanship is bending the rules, and we've got to make a distinctive statement here. Whereas, so comma, space, whereas deviance is breaking the rules. Brilliant. I've got a meeting. There you go, folks. Deviance is breaking the rules. So there's my answer for that one. Let's take it further. We've got here, describe using examples from football the difference between sportsmanship and gamesmanship. Now for this particular one, I'm going to bring the answer in and we'll actually mark this again. You might want to pause here and take your time with this particular answer. But we've got here, sportsmanship is following the rules and being gracious in victory or defeat. That was meant to be read. So there's our, as it were, description of what sportsmanship is. Fantastic. We would get a mark for this. For example, shaking hands after the match, whether you won or lost. Look at that, guys. You see that? Whether you won or lost. I really like that. So we'll put that in there. Whereas gamesmanship is bending the rules. So we've got bending. I'll put that as correct. And we've got here to gain an unfair advantage. For example, pretending not to hear the whistle and kicking the ball away from the opposition. Now, we've got to be careful how we manage that. That is just within the rules depending on interpretation, so it can be gamesmanship. Obviously, if you just kick the ball away, that's time wasting. But if you get away with it, I suppose we're saying it's gamesmanship. Further down here, could you complete this question if you had to give examples from a different sport? Well, let's have a look. Hockey. What would be gamesmanship? Okay, so we would say here gamesmanship. Remember that if it touches your foot, it's a foul in It's a free hit in hockey. So here, hitting the ball against the foot deliberately. So if you target your opponent's foot to get a free hit deliberately, there's nothing in the rules that say you can't do that, but it is a form of gamesmanship. You are trying to effectively bend the rules, and you might get a short corner, for example, for something like that if it's inside the D. What would sportsmanship be? Passing the ball back to opponent or to the opponent when it goes out of play. So imagine it when the ball goes out the sideline, and you effectively hand the ball back to your opponent because they're going to hit him from the side. And, you know, that's a nice thing to do, isn't it? Sort of a generous and gracious thing to do. And what would deviance be? It's intentionally fouling to cause an injury. Okay, so, you know, you might follow through with a stick or something like that, fouling to cause an injury. You know, something like that is a deviant behavior. You could put in taking a ped or something like that if you want to. What about tennis? What would be gamesmanship? Well, a really good example in tennis is an underarm serve. It's in the rules. Kyrgios does this a lot, for example, but it's sort of an act of gamesmanship because it's not the done thing and it's not expected to be done. An act of sportsmanship, let's say shaking hands across the net before the game. You might also want to say calling good shot when your opponent does something, you know, a great lob or something like that. And what about this one? Calling the ball out if it's in. So if you're playing a tennis match and you're umpiring for yourselves, and you can clearly see the ball is in, it's just landed at your feet and it's definitely in, and if you called out in that situation, that would be a deviant behavior. Okay, below are some examples questions that will get you thinking a bit deeper about this topic. Let's work through them together. So I'm actually going to go a little bit faster here, and I'm going to bring the answer in this one. It explain the importance of the FA's fair play principles. Now, it's so applied, this one, that I think it would trip up most students. Just to see what would pick up marks. The principles guide players and coaches on the rules of the game. So they're there to guide players and coaches. Lovely. To ensure that everyone can choose to follow the rules and demonstrate quality of sportsmanship. This distinction between following the rules and bending or breaking the rules is clear to everyone. Okay, so everyone knows the difference between gamesmanship and deviance. Okay, and that gets us the mark. So there's some really nice answers there for you. So, because what would happen, of course, if someone chooses to be deviant, take a ped, for example, that's on them, isn't it? They can be sanctioned, they can be punished for that. And we've got another answer down here. I've just squeezed it on the page. Explain why sportsmanship is important for grassroots sport. Now, it feels like a really tough question in one sense, but we just need to apply our same principles. It teaches the qualities of let me go above that one. It teaches the qualities of fair play. Lovely. Circle, tick, 1 mark. This should then continue through the development of young athletes. So this happens throughout their performance. We might go further and say we might want to put into adult or senior sport. Might be a nice way to add a bit of detail onto that one. So it teaches qualities of fair play, and this then continues into later life and later participation, and we get our max in that environment there. Okay. So let's think about this, folks. We've got a kind of an exam question here. It's an interesting one because we're going to classify one particular skill on 3 continua. Okay, and we might go here. Is this shot open or closed? Well, it's open, because it's not a serve and they have to interpret the incoming shot to them. Is it basic or complex? It's relatively complex because they've got quite a bit of decision making to do. And is it low or high organisation? Well, there are elements of it you could break down, but we would describe this as a high organisational skill because it's kind of hard to break it down into lots of different subroutines and different units. So you kind of have to practice it as a whole. At least the shot, you could potentially play one shot by itself. assuming you've got someone sort of feeding the shuttle to you. But nevertheless, what we want to do here is we want to sort of do this for different examples. So we've got a bunch of examples here, and we want to be thinking about, well, how would we actually classify them? So let's first of all, well, how would we classify a volleyball spike? So this is the player that's sort of in white here. Well, we'd certainly say it's an open skill because they're having to interpret the environment, they're having to avoid the blocker and so on. We'd say it's a relatively complex skill. And I think it would be fair to say that it's also a relatively high organisational skill because it's hard to break that down into parts and practice those things easily. What about a penalty flick, though, in hockey? Is it open or closed? Well, I would argue, not the goalkeeping, the taking, I would argue it's more closed. I would also argue that it's relatively basic, because not because it's easy, but because there's relatively few decisions to make, certainly once the skill is underway. And can you sort of separate it easily? Not easily. So again, I'd say that's relatively high organisation, this one. What about I think this is triple jumping. Is it open or closed? Well, this is a closed skill because the environment does not change. Okay, you could have a gust of wind or something, it's possible, but generally that's not going to change. There's going to be very little adjustment of that. Is it basic or complex? It's basic because again there's relatively few decisions to make. Is it high or low organisation? Well, it depends on one's interpretation. Because we haven't got a low organisation, well, I'm going to go for it, because you could separate the approach, you could separate the hop, the step, you could practice these things to some degree separately. So there's different sort of discrete elements to it, but actually they're quite hard to practice separately. So I'm not saying it's strong, low organisation. It's just perhaps not fully high organisation. And finally, folks, we've got the argument here. What about cycling? Is it open or closed? Well, cycling is broadly a closed skill. Obviously, if you're in a peloton and a pack, then you've got to do more sort of evasiveness and you perhaps need to be more responsive. But generally, it's a closed skill. Is it basic or is it complex? There's relatively few decisions, so it's a relatively basic skill. Is it low or high organisation? It's very high organisation because it's very difficult to separate the downstroke of the pedal from the upstroke of the pedal, for example. So we can't really separate those things out. Now, with all that in mind, folks, I've actually got some justifications here, and your teacher has got these, so I'm just going to kind of go through them. Right, a volleyball spike is open as the performer has to adapt to the speed and position of the ball as well as the movement of the team. It's also complex as it involves a lot of concentration and has a high level of organisation. It can't be broken down. Whereas taking a hockey flick is closed, the skill is pre-planned, few external factors, it also has high organisation, it can't be broken down. Triple jump is basic, it does not require much attention or information processing. It's low organisation, maybe because there's subroutines and can be broken down and practiced separately, arguably, as I said before. And then, of course, for our cyclist, this is a closed skill as she is cycling by herself and the environment is relatively stable. If she was in a race, there would be others around her, maybe more open, still closed though. Cycling is a base skill, it does not require lots of decision-making and concentration. It's high organisation as you can't break it down. Exactly the points that we made. So can you see how in our exam we may need to be able to classify, which is what I did first, but we certainly need to be able to justify, and I'm going to come back to that idea in a few seconds, in fact right now. Let's have a look at this. As we know, the skills are all on a continuum. Using the images and continuum below, agree or disagree with the placement along the continuum, justify your answer. So we've got the idea here that high jump, I believe that's high jump and not pole vault, we're saying here that it is a more closed skill. What do you guys think of that? Would you tend to agree with that? Is it closed enough? Is that far enough? And I'm going to write the following, and I'll reposition in a second. I believe it should be more closed. So I'm arguing effectively that it should move in that direction. It should be more closed as it is not affected, as it is not affected by the environment. Okay, the environment is stable, in other words. Now, I know some of you sort of say to me, well, what if it's windy? What if it's raining? Just to be clear on that one, it would have to be a gust of wind in the takeoff stride, change what they were going to do. If it's just wet underfoot, that's consistent. So, it's got to be something that changes in the action and changes as you're doing it. Now, we're going to go further. Oops, I don't want a software update. The reason for this is that the athlete can choose, is the athlete, within reason at least, can choose when to jump. Yes, they do have a time limit, that's absolutely true, but within that they've got completely free choice, and do not need to respond. To others. So it's a controlled environment, it's a closed environment. Now we could go further. The technique is consistent. In fact, I'll just put things in here like technique is consistent. We could be saying the same thing. It's the same each and every time. Hopefully, at least if we're doing it well, the technique is consistent. It doesn't change. We repeat the movement and so on. Of course, we could vary the speed of the run-up or be more aggressive in the takeoff, that sort of thing. But I'm going to argue that ours should be somewhere like there. And by all means, you might see it slightly differently. That's fine. What about this one? A rugby, I think we're talking about the rugby tackle here. Is it complex or is it basic? Okay, is it complex or basic? And what I'm going to argue is, again, it should move towards complex. I'm going to put it sort of here. I believe it is more complex due, and I know the teacher's got slightly different answers to me, due to lots of decisions, what's the angle, where to tackle, where my teammates are, lots of decisions and interpretation. So because of that, we have got the idea that we have to, effectively make some decisions as a result of this. It requires concentration. Would we say anything else? Yeah, you could even argue it's right at the far end, actually. So I just want to sort of finish this little section off, folks, and I want us to come back to you. This language here is brilliant language for you to be using when you're justifying, when we put it in there, and hopefully you can see that I'm putting in there, I believe, I think, because of this, because the reason for this, etc. These are all lovely terms for you to use.